Lesson 13 starts with a superlative. The superlative is one of the degrees that an adjective has. Adjective modifies a noun, and adjectives have three so-called degrees. The first one is the positive. Second one is the comparative. Third one is the superlative. So the positive form of the adjective would be, for example, long in English. The comparative would be longer. That's a regular comparative in English. And the superlative would be the longest. Of course, you're aware that there are irregular comparatives and superlatives. It's obviously not good, gooder, and goodest. It's good, better, and best. And the same holds true in Latin. You should be prepared for there to be, in the long run, irregular forms of the comparative and the superlative. For now, you're just learning the normal morphology of the superlative. Morphology is the rules of the way that the word changes. In order to form a superlative, you would take the second thing in the dictionary, and remember this doesn't work for all adjectives, but just so-called regular ones. For example, if you have beatus, beata, beatum. Note that this is a 2-1-2 adjective. You drop the A from the second thing in the dictionary, in this case, beata, and then you add isimus for the masculine, nominative singular, isima for the nominative singular feminine, and isimum for the nominative singular neuter. So it would be beatissimus for the masculine, it would be beatissimum for the feminine, beatissima for the feminine, and beatissimum for the neuter. That's the nominative, nominative, and nominative. Singular masculine, singular feminine, singular neuter. Adjectives always come in this pattern: nominative singular masculine, nominative singular feminine, nominative singular neuter. Once you have beatissimus, you just decline that like you would any other word that ends in us. Once you have beatissima, it's just like puella, and once you have beatissimum, it's just like templum. Nothing terribly difficult about the formation of the superlative. You translate the superlative as, in the case of beatissimus, the happiest. Or, of course, for the words that don't work with happiest, you would say most happy. Long becomes longest in the superlative, and so forth and so on. The words quam, quam, and tamen often go together in a main clause and a subordinate clause. I showed you main clauses and subordinate clauses in Lesson 12. This is really the basic pattern for all complex sentences in Latin. There will be a main clause plus at least one subordinate clause. You can have several subordinate clauses added on, but often you'll just have one. It doesn't matter how many you have. There's a main clause with a main verb, and then there's a subordinate clause. Quam, quam will usually go in the main clause. That's how this pattern works. It means although in English. And then tamen will follow it in the subordinate clause. It means nevertheless in English. Here's an example similar to the one that the book provides. Quam puella est beatissima, although the girl is the happiest, nevertheless no one loves the girl. Sorry, this one actually says no one does not love the girl. A little double negative right there. If you get rid of the no, it makes more sense. Although the girl is the happiest, nevertheless no one loves the girl. The book has an example that says, although many maidens had loved the youth, nevertheless Narcissus loved no one. There's not really something complicated about quam, quam, and tamen. They're just words to look forward to that are often connected. They often come in the same complex sentence in a main clause and a subordinate clause. They just mean although and nevertheless. A relatively simple verbal form that is presented is the irregular verb possum, possa, potui, and you'll note that that fourth principal part is lacking. It's very much like the verb sum, if you look at it closely enough, it's just the verb sum with a prefix on it. The prefix has to do with potential, as you can see in certain of the forms that are not followed by an S. All the forms that are followed by an S, or all the forms rather that have the prefix followed by the S, it turns the POT into a POS. So there are 3 examples and 3 examples of the POT. The word means I am able. This is the indicative, present, active of the irregular verb possum. As long as you see the pattern of sum es est, sumus estis sunt, it's just a minor effort to memorize this new verbal form. Possum is I am able. Potest is you are able. Potest is he, she, or it is able. Possumus is we are able. Potestis is you all, in the plural, are able. And possunt is they are able. Simple. The book introduces the ways to translate the ablative. I think it's overly complicated what the book tries to introduce, and yet at the same time they don't spend enough time explaining it. I don't believe that it is very valuable for you to know words like the ablative of means, the ablative of manner, the ablative of accompaniment, the ablative of description. No ancient author ever used those terms, they just used the ablative. So I don't want you to memorize things like that. I want you to just understand that the ablative can be used with prepositions, and watch as I scroll down, or it can be used without any prepositions. When it's used with a preposition, it's easy. You translate the preposition and then the ablative that follows it. Here's the list on the left-hand side of all the prepositions that are possible to be used with the ablative. I've put an asterisk next to the ones that are common in medieval Latin or ecclesiastical Latin, in church Latin. So this list is comprehensive for both classical Latin and later Latin. But if you're just working on the classical Latin, I would omit the ones with an asterisk because they will not come up in the textbook. Note that this list extends down here to super. It's hard to fit it all on one page. But there is the complete and total list of words that, prepositions that are used with the ablative. And it's very simple. If you have one of these prepositions before a word in the ablative or a phrase in the ablative, as in this example, you just translate the preposition with the ablative. This says Mercury walks with his father Jove. Cum means with, and so therefore you translate the ablative as with. I'm not going to go down the list of all these different words and how they translate. You can look them up in the dictionary when you come to them. But this list itself, you should start memorizing. This is a priority for this class. This will make translating the ablative very easy because the ablative can do a lot of different things, as the length of this list indicates. Super means above, for example. Sub means below. So there are many translations for the ablative. But as long as you have one of these prepositions before the ablative, there's no guesswork. If you say sine woke, it means without voice. If you see sub aqua, it means underwater. And so forth and so on. So there's no mystery to this. You just translate the preposition as you would normally translate it, and then you translate the ablative. The ablative can be tricky, however, because it can be used without any one of these words. That's when you kind of have to guess how to translate the ablative. So when you have no preposition, you have to figure out from the context how to translate it, but that's not even that hard. I have a list right here that the book doesn't provide you. It's very simple, and every time you come to an ablative that does not have a preposition in front of it to indicate exactly how it's translated, just plug in one of these options and you'll always get it right. Plug it in and decide which one sounds the best. The simple list is by, from, with, in, at, on. But you can add by means of, or away from, or within. And if you look at all the examples from the book, they all use one of these English words. They don't have a preposition, but you just go through this English list and you'll figure it out. So for example, the book gives you this phrase or this sentence: Narcissus magna voce clamat. Narcissus, with a great voice, shouts. There's no preposition that says cum right there, and you don't need a preposition in Latin for cum. There are certain instances when you need a preposition for the ablative and certain instances when you don't. Since you are not composing Latin in this class, there's no reason for you to learn those rules. All you need to do is be able to recognize how to translate the Latin when you see it. In this case, you go through the list. Narcissus by a great voice shouts. That doesn't sound that good. Narcissus by means of a great voice shouts. That's okay. Narcissus from a great voice shouts. Terrible. Narcissus with a great voice shouts. That's right. And then you stop. Narcissus in a great voice shouts. That works. Narcissus at a great voice shouts. That's wrong. Narcissus on a great voice shouts. That's wrong. So you just go through this list, cross out the ones that don't make any sense, and one of them will always sound right. Whenever you see the Latin without the ablative without a preposition, go through the list of by, from, with, in, at, on, and you'll find the one that sounds the best in English. You'll never get it wrong if you use that list. Next, the book gives you these rules, which are often broken, for recognizing I-stem third declension nouns. I always say in my language classes that the rules always apply except when they don't, which is almost always. So these rules are not always, but they're often broken. They're useful, though, for distinguishing a third declension I-stem noun from the regular I-stem noun. A regular I-stem noun is like rex regis, and there are no extra I's added anywhere, etc. On the other hand, an I-stem third declension noun adds an IUM in the genitive plural. So in the example of rex regis, which is not an I-stem, its genitive plural is just UM. I skipped over a couple. I said etc. right here. Here's your genitive plural, it's just UM. Whereas an I-stem third declension would have an I before the UM. It's going to have an IUM in the genitive plural. I'll show you examples in a second. The following are the three rules that show you which nouns are I-stem nouns. This, if you're going to skip anything in this class to learn, this is among the less interesting and important things to memorize. You will get some genitives wrong when you try to decline them if you don't memorize these rules, but you are not in this class to learn to compose Latin. You're in this class to learn to read Latin. The better you can compose it, the better you can write it. But it's not fundamental to passing this class. At any rate, here are the rules, now that I've demoralized you from learning them. Nouns that have the same amount of syllables in the nominative singular and genitive singular, that's the lexical entry, and that follow the pattern of having an IS in the nominative singular and an IS in the genitive, or an ES in the nominative and an IS in the genitive, add an IUM for the genitive plural. Textbook gives the example of finis, which is the nominative singular, and finis, which is the genitive singular. They have the same amount of syllables. This ends in IS, this ends in IS. So when you get to the genitive plural, you add an IUM. Very simple to figure out. The book also gives you the example here of Ades, ADIS. Again, you have an ES and an IS, as in the second model. And these two words, the nominative singular and the genitive singular, have the same amount of syllables. So in the genitive plural, you add IUM. Second category is nouns with nominatives ending in S or X with a genitive singular that has two consonants before the IS. So look at Rex Regis. That ends in X, but it does not have two consonants before the IS. So that is not an I stem. But Nox, Noctis is. It has two consonants before the IS, and it ends in X. Therefore, the genitive plural is IUM. Third category is neuters, so you'd have to know that by looking it up, that end in AL, E, or AR. So for example, animal, spelled it wrong, animalis, that word is going to add IUM in the genitive plural. I spelled it wrong again. But you get the idea. I'm not going to bother to spell it out. Now the problem with learning these rules, again, is that there are exceptions. For example, euinus, that's not an I stem, even though it follows that rule. The word canis is another example that does not follow that rule. The word senex, senis, is another example of a word that does not follow that rule. Volucrus, these are on the bottom of page 109, is another example. So all the examples are on the bottom of page 109. You aren't really going to have to compose Latin. You should, however, have these rules and exceptions to refer to. It is not something to spend hours memorizing these rules. It is something that you should learn, and then you should be able to refer to it and know where you have it in your notes so that you don't completely forget it, or your Latin will be sloppy when you have to decline things for me. At this point in the class, you still do have to decline things for me. So learn these rules. Don't fret over them or spend all of your time trying to master them. There's too many exceptions. Look at the exceptions on page 109. They'll stick in your brain a little bit if you work with them and then move on. It's not my fault, but this lesson never ends. Too much material in this chapter, if you ask me. The indicative, future perfect, active. Remember, that's mood, tense, and voice. That's always how we organize the verbs. In order to conjugate the indicative, future, active, you take the third principal part, for example, a Maui. You drop the I. That's always what you do with the third principal part. Now you would have a Mau. And then you add ERO, ERIS, ERIT. I know I don't have to exactly spell this out for you with each different form, but it may help you to see the process if you haven't mastered it yet. And note the irregular form down here, ERINT. You're used to seeing ERUNT, but it is indeed ERINT. So that's a bit irregular. You're used to seeing a U before the NT in verbs. This is irregular. It's actually what it should be, but you're not used to seeing what it should be. You translate this form. It's a strange form. I know you don't use it much in your normal everyday life, but it comes up occasionally. You translate this as I will have loved. You will have loved. She will have loved. We will have loved. Y'all will have loved. And they will have loved. It's unusual, I understand. They will have loved her before she even knows how to love them back. They will have loved her for 3 years before she even appreciates it. Not a normal, everyday kind of sentence, but it does come up in Latin. So you have to know this form of the indicative future perfect active. Now, if you want to talk about far too much information, the word quem is introduced, and this is a much longer lesson, but I'll try to do it very briefly. So far, the book gives you the word quem, which shows up as a form of various pronouns. A pronoun is one of the 8 parts of speech, and what it functions as is a replacement for another noun. And there are a variety of different pronouns: reflexive pronouns, personal pronouns, interrogative pronouns. So you'll learn all of those one by one. So far, the book just gives you a taste of this kind of pronoun. Quem can be used as one of 2 different kinds of pronouns. So far, you'll learn. It's not even the end of the story for quem. Quem can be used in a question. It's translated as whom. And in this case, it's called an interrogative pronoun. It is, you have to understand, just one form of many for quem. Quem actually has a lexical entry that looks like this: qui, quae, quod. But you're just learning the accusative singular masculine at this point. So you're not learning the nominative singular, the feminine singular, the neuter singular. You're not learning anything but one form, quem, which is the accusative singular masculine only. In this case, in this sentence right here, quem is used interrogatively. It's an interrogative pronoun in this example. You can tell because it has a question mark. That's how you know it's interrogative. That's asking a question. And this sentence is translated as whom did you see in the woods? So quem can be whom, question mark. That's one way in which the word quem will appear in this class. Quem will also appear so far in this class, again, as the accusative singular masculine form of the so-called relative pronoun. The last example was the interrogative pronoun. This example is the relative pronoun. The word relative means it refers back. That's literally what that means in Latin. Refers back to another word that comes before it, which is called the antecedent. The antecedent literally means comes before. So the relative pronoun refers back to another word that comes before it. The word that comes before it in Latin is named properly. It's called the antecedent. Look at the examples. They're simple. Even though that explanation may seem difficult, it's simple in practice. I see the boy, quem, whom you love. Quem is a relative pronoun referring back to the boy. I see the boy, which boy you love. That's what a relative pronoun does. Here's another example. Inveni virum quem puella vidit. I have found the man whom the girl saw. Quem is a relative pronoun referring back to an antecedent, a word that comes before it. I saw the man whom the girl saw. There it is. Quem can be used as whom. Whom did you see? In that case, you would refer to it as an interrogative pronoun. Quem vidit, whom did he see? Or if it's used as to refer back to a previous noun, in that case, it's called it's called a relative pronoun. In both cases, it's translated as whom, and in both cases, it's the accusative singular masculine only. It's all the book wants you to know so far. This marathon lesson continues with the reflexive pronoun. Say this is another highly complex concept to introduce. It really deserves its own chapter. But I'll, again, try to be brief about it and as clear as possible because the book only introduces it in a very limited fashion. The reflexive pronoun is, again, a pronoun, which means it replaces another noun. And the reflexive pronoun means it refers back to the subject of the sentence in particular. So it has to refer back to whatever the nominative is. That's, again, maybe difficult to understand as a description. When I show you examples, it'll be much easier. The reflexive pronoun se is peculiar because it does not have a nominative form. And it's even more peculiar because it's exactly the same in the singular and the plural. Sui is the genitive singular and the genitive plural. Sibi is the dative singular and the dative plural. Se or sese, it depends on the author's choice, is the accusative singular and the accusative plural, and se or sese is the ablative singular and the ablative plural. Now look at the examples that'll make it much more clear than this description in words. The youth had seen himself in the water. This is a reflexive pronoun because se refers back to the subject. The youth had seen himself. Himself is the same as the youth. That's why it's called the reflexive pronoun. Here's another example. The boy praises himself. Himself refers back to the boy. It is the same as the subject, and so therefore you call it the reflexive pronoun. Both of those examples are in the accusative, and that's the only form that the book uses in this chapter, so I'm going to stay just with the accusative. The other forms are more complicated to use anyway. And I guess because the author thought there wasn't enough information in this chapter, they provide this whole long description of how to predict gender. You will never need to know how to predict gender. You may want to read these over because, again, it may stick in your brain and give you some hint as to whether a word is nominative, masculine, feminine, or neuter. But you'll never need to really memorize that kind of information. You can always look it up in the dictionary. So don't spend a lot of time on page 110, number 85 in the book, because you don't need to predict whether a word is masculine, feminine, or neuter. That's a long enough lesson. Your assignment is posted on Blackboard, and the assignment is up under content for you to post your answers on there. And the syllabus has been posted and updated. I may revise that slightly depending on how this class works in the course of the summer. But please Skype me or call me or email me with questions.